So who are you? How would you choose to describe who you are? Would you choose to tell people what you do professionally or maybe leisurely? Would you choose to describe who you are in relation to someone else? Mother, husband, sister, friend, follower? Maybe you would start by describing what you don't like or what you do like. This question of who we are is something that each and every one of us has to face at some point in our life. And maybe you're an adult and you're so glad you're past adolescence and you think you've nailed it. Like, you can confidently say who you are. And I want to say congratulations. Like, there's some benefits to adulthood. Like, come on, that's awesome. You know who you are. Well, this question of who are you, in Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, the caterpillar poses this question to Alice, and he says, "Who are you?" And Alice is unsure about how to answer this question because so much has changed for her in one day that she's actually unsure of who she is. Alice has gone down the rabbit hole, and her journey has turned her world upside down, and so she's not sure what to say. Who are you? Well, in chapter 11 of Matthew's Gospel, we're continuing this story in Matthew's Gospel. John the Baptist sends his disciples to ask Jesus that very question. And John the Baptist went before Jesus to prepare the way. And so John thinks he knows who he is. His job is to preach repentance and to preach about the kingdom of God and to encourage people to turn from their sin and turn to God. And yet he has ended up in prison. And like Alice, so much has changed for him in his life that he's unsure of how to answer this question of Jesus' identity. He might have also been questioning his own identity when he sent his messengers to ask Jesus who Jesus is. He knows his role is to pave the way, to go before the Messiah. So why isn't he out doing that? Now, this question of Jesus' identity is going to drive chapters 11 and 12 in Matthew's Gospel. So John the Baptist wants to know if Jesus is the Messiah. The crowds and groups of people have decided that Jesus is the Messiah. And the Pharisees and Sadducees who oppose Jesus have decided that he is definitely not the Messiah. And in fact, this is when the Pharisees are going to get together to figure out a way to permanently remove Jesus. This is when their efforts to take Jesus out are going to escalate, and their story to permanently remove and kill Jesus is going to drive the rest of Matthew's Gospel. And last week, we heard Jesus' instructions to the disciples to go out empowered and full of authority. And the instruction to spread the good news is something that we also follow. This is an invitation for us as well. But the question is, how do we do that? How do we go out in the mission of God amid the everyday ordinariness of our own lives? How do we participate in the work of God when our own lives feel messy and broken? Well, we imitate Jesus. And I could just stop there and be like, that's it. Just go imitate Jesus. Have a good day. It's like a 3-minute sermon. So I understand. Sometimes it's easier said than done. I'm on the same page with you. To imitate means to follow or model oneself on someone else. You copy the image of someone else. And when Jesus responds to John the Baptist regarding his identity, he points him to the evidence. And so we're going to pick that up in Matthew 11, starting in verse 2. When John heard in prison what Christ was doing, he sent his disciples to ask him, "Are you the one who was to come, or should we expect someone else?" Jesus replied, "Go back and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cured, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and good news is preached to the poor. Blessed is the man who does not fall away on account of me." Jesus points to 6 actions. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. And centuries before this, the prophet Isaiah. He wrote down these 6 miracles, and he said, "You will recognize the time of the Messiah by these miracles, these actions." And the 6 types of miracles mentioned by Jesus are foretold by Isaiah, and then they're fulfilled in the person and work of Jesus. So now Jesus doesn't directly answer John's question. Instead, he points John to the evidence. And John might have been looking for a simple, yes or no. But that's not what Jesus is going to do, because Jesus is answering and pointing to a larger point. His point is that the prophecies of the Old Testament are coming true. And the kingdom of heaven is now directly present because of the mighty deeds of Jesus. And what's more, Jesus is actually going to use this as an opportunity to also confirm John's identity. He turns to the crowd of people around him and he asks them 3 times what they went to see when they followed John. The emphasis here is on seeing. What did you go out to see when you followed John in the wilderness? Jesus points to John's deeds as a sign of his identity as a prophet. So we have Jesus, who answers the question by making the case for his identity by pointing to his deeds. He makes the point that John's deeds reveal his identity. And so, too, your identity is revealed by your actions. And what you do matters. This is about the how of how to imitate Jesus' example. And Matthew is going to give us 2 bookends to follow in our discipleship of Jesus. And the first one is your deeds, your actions. So I get it. If you are looking at that list of 6 miracles and you're thinking, I haven't restored anyone's sight this week. I haven't raised anyone from the dead this week. I'm with you. Same. My week apparently was boring because I didn't do any of those things. So how do we imitate Jesus? Well, when Jesus fundamentally acts, what he does is he meets human needs. He meets the needs of people around him. One of our core values here at Stonebridge is service. And we truly believe that the instruction to care and to serve for others was not merely a suggestion made by Jesus, but rather it's a command. And it's a command that we follow. You are bringing the kingdom of heaven into reality when you care for and when you serve other people. And next weekend, our students are participating in a 30-hour famine. They are going without solid food for 30 hours to raise money for our international partners in Uganda. Is it easy to go without food for 30 hours? No. I'm going to be honest with you. There are a lot of times during those 30 hours when I want to eat, when I dream about food, when I imagine what I'm going to eat when we're done. And in reality, what I do is actually go to bed without eating because I'm so tired. But does the work that they do help to provide for the needs of children in Uganda? Yes, absolutely. And I'm proud of their willingness to step out of themselves and to not think about their own needs in order to provide for the needs of children they'll probably never meet, and yet they are willing to serve others. But it's not just service that we need to imitate. The way that Jesus treats those around him is remarkable. And when Jesus sees the crowds of hungry people who follow him day in and day out, he has compassion on them. I don't think it's any secret that I'm an introvert. And I'll be honest with you, the idea of crowds following me around day in and day out sounds like my nightmare. I'm just going to say it. So my attitude, if people followed me around, would not be the same as Jesus. So this is a lesson to myself as well. But the attitude that Jesus has for these people is compassion and empathy. Jesus is not just physically meeting their needs, but he's also emotionally meeting their needs. Jesus sees them and he feels for them. And in the way of the heart, Henry Nouwen writes, compassion is hard because it requires the inner disposition to go with others to the place where they are weak, to the place where they are vulnerable, lonely, and broken. And most of us would like to shy away from these parts of other people. And if we're being honest, we probably also want to shy away from those parts of ourselves. And yet Nouwen goes on to say that the moments of greatest comfort in his own life were when someone said, "I cannot take away your pain. I cannot offer you a solution to your problem, but I can promise you that I won't leave you alone, and I will hold on to you as long and as well as I can." So who are you? Are you someone who is present for people both physically and emotionally? So Matthew isn't done painting this picture of Jesus' identity. Jesus is also a servant leader. And in chapter 12, Matthew again turns to the words of Isaiah, this time to describe Jesus' character. So a person's character is formed by their moral and mental choices. It's the choice to get up each and every day and to do right, to choose to do right over and over until it becomes a part of your life. And so this is what Matthew says is the role of Jesus as a servant leader. This is chapter 12, verse 18. "Here is my servant whom I have chosen, the one I love, in whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him, and he will proclaim justice to the nations. He will not quarrel or cry out. No one will hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out, till he leads justice to victory. In his name the nations will put their hope." The focus here is on what Jesus does not do. He does not quarrel with the Pharisees. He does not judge. Jesus will not walk all over people or push them into a corner. And Jesus does not overwhelm or even crush his enemies. And so when John is asking about his identity, he's confused because he wants him to crush his enemies. He wants him to bring liberation and freedom. But it's going to come in a different way than John expects. And this non-triumphalist image that we get of Jesus as a servant leader is a pretty far cry from our modern day leaders. Who you choose to imitate means everything. But here's the problem with imitation. We usually reduce it to just copying someone's actions. The Greek word for imitation is mimesis. It involves much more than just copying someone. It means to embody and become what the other person is. Jesus, the Son, is Emmanuel, God with us. Jesus is the incarnation, the human embodiment of God's self-giving love. And so therefore, Jesus is love. And in order to identify with us, God took on human flesh and lived among us. So in turn, how do we embody this love? When you willingly choose to step into someone's brokenness and identify with them, you are embodying God's love and Christ's actions. When you choose to stand up for the harassed, the people who have no voice, you are embodying the love of God. And Jesus reached out to the homeless, the foreigner, and the broken. And in turn, Jesus calls us to care for the least of these. And spoiler alert, later on in Matthew, Jesus is going to drive this point home again. He's going to call out those who have not ministered to the hungry, the thirsty, the stranger, the naked, the sick, and the shut-in. And when we refuse to help those who are hungry and thirsty and sick, we refuse to help Jesus. Have you met someone's needs this week? Maybe someone that you are not related to. So actions and embodying God's word and God's love are one side of the bookend, and the other side is just as important. And the other side is our words. The Pharisees are not at all impressed with Jesus' deeds. They have chosen to ignore the signs that point to Jesus' true nature. And so they're going to try and engage Jesus in a debate, because what they want to do is trap him. So in this debate in chapter 12, what they do is they actually align the work of Jesus when he casts out demons to the work of Satan. But Jesus is having none of this, and he's not actually going to fall for their bait. He's going to ignore what they say. But he is going to give them a response that I think probably stung his listeners. And so we pick this up in chapter 12, verse 33. Make a tree good, and its fruit will be good. Or make a tree bad, and its fruit will be bad. For a tree is recognized by its fruit. You brood of vipers, how can you who are evil say anything good? For out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. The good man brings good things out of the good stored up in him, and the evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in him. But I tell you that men will have to give account on the day of judgment for every careless word they have spoken. For by your words you will be acquitted, and by your words you will be condemned. Our words. This is actually not the first time that Matthew brings up good and bad fruit. Back in chapter 7, Matthew says something very similar, but he draws a different conclusion. He draws the conclusion that just as you can identify a tree by its fruit, so you can identify a person by their actions. So now, 5 chapters later, Matthew is going to make the same point, but he's going to draw a different conclusion, a conclusion that actually goes deeper. What a person says is inescapably related to who a person is. And I think you and I can agree that words matter. If words didn't matter, I could say anything I wanted up here, and you guys would be okay with it. If words didn't matter, your kids could come home and say the most detestable things, and you would applaud them for having an extended vocabulary. You'd be like, oh my, what flavorful words you know. So let's get real for a minute. Words matter, words have meaning, and words are powerful. Words have the ability to lift people up or drag people down. And your kids and teenagers are definitely listening to what you say. But what's more, they're listening to what the media says, the news, the people who shout, the loudest voices, the voices that are raised in anger and reveal their prejudices, the voices that tear people down. What do you say to a child who wants to know why it's okay for you to call someone a name, but it's not okay for them? What do you say to a teenager who asks why it's okay for adults to act like children? I'm in a unique position to explain adults to teenagers and teenagers to adults, and I'm stuck. I don't have a good answer for why it's okay for adults to act and speak like children. I don't know what to say to that, because the old adage, do as I say, not as I do, that doesn't hold weight here, because do you actually want your children following what society says? The words here that Jesus is pointing to are the careless, useless words that you speak when you are angry, when you don't get your way, when you fly off the handle and you don't rein in your tongue. These are the words that would have been better left unspoken. The words you speak come from the very center of who you are. Words like deeds are indicators of a person's relationship to Jesus and place in the kingdom. So why does it matter so much what we say? Well, it matters what we say because of who we represent. And in a letter to the believers in Ephesus, Paul reminds them to imitate God, therefore, in everything you do, because you are his dear children. And it can seem overwhelming to imitate God in everything that we do. I mean, we're going to fail. Probably failed already this morning. We're going to fall down because none of us is perfect, and we don't have to be. If we get hung up on the legalistic nature of everything, then we are no better than the Pharisees. If we get hung up on the legalistic nature, then we miss the grace that God is offering to us. because it's as God's dear and loved children that we follow in his footsteps. And it's in the context of a loving relationship that we truly come into our own as disciples of Christ. And so, returning to the beginning, how do we imitate Jesus? You can only imitate that which you know. You can only imitate Jesus when you've entered into a relationship with him. And at the heart of Jesus' message is an invitation to come and enter into a relationship with him and to follow him in discipleship. And so in Matthew chapter 11, Jesus turns to the crowd and he invites them to come. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Jesus said that what comes out of your mouth comes from your heart. This is from the heart of God. And the message translates it this way. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace, and I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. The title for this sermon series is All This Took Place. All this took place. Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. All of this took place so that you could enter into a relationship with God. Are you tired of being who you used to be? Jesus is saying, come. Are you tired of falling into the trap of things that define you that are meaningless? Jesus is inviting you to come. Are you ready to recover your life? Jesus is inviting you to step closer. And today we celebrate communion, celebrating that Jesus died on the cross and rose to new life so that you and I could live freely and that we could have new life. Jesus is inviting everyone, all, to enter into a relationship with him, to follow him in discipleship, and to imitate him in a broken world.